Hi, I'm Matt from Verso. Welcome back to another Matt's Chat. If you've been enjoying these Matt's Chats, please subscribe, like the video, really helps a lot. And above all else, please check out some of the music on this channel because it's really why this channel exists. We recently released a music video for our song Artemis, which we are super proud of. It's fully animated. It's almost 20 minutes long. It's basically a short film. It's really cool. So hopefully you check that out. Check out some of the other music videos. And this is kind of a sequel episode today. I've done the Prog Rock for Indie Rockers. I've done two of them. I'm not sure which order I'm going to release these in, but my wife said, why don't you do the opposite? Why don't you do Indie Rock for Prog Rockers? I said, oh, that's a really good idea. So I'm going to talk about a few indie rock albums, albums that I really loved and really love, continue to really love, that I think appeal for one reason or another to people who are more into progressive rock music, maybe don't know a lot about indie rock. And I'm going to steer clear of a couple of the big names that you probably already know if you've ever kind of encountered these crossover kind of indie prog people. Decemberists, people always talking about the Decemberists as like an indie rock band that could cross over to prog. They are basically a prog band. You know, they've done these big concept albums where everything song flows into every other song. They've got these like 12, 14 minute long epics. I love the Decemberists, but you probably already know them if you are interested in this kind of music. Sufjan Stevens is another example. Probably not going to touch on Sufjan Stevens. He's one of my favorite artists of all time. Illinois is one of the greatest albums that's ever been recorded, but you probably already know that. So I'm going to talk about maybe a couple artists you haven't heard of, and maybe a couple of artists you probably have heard of, but maybe haven't considered in this light. So again, no particular order other than alphabetical. I'm not ranking these albums or anything like that. So I'm just going to start where we start on the alphabet, and that is a British band called Electrelane and an album called No Shouts, No Calls. So this album came out in, I think, 2005, around then. And it really flew under the radar. I don't know anybody else who knows this band. I listened to this album so much when it came out. I adore this album. It is so good. Electrelane it's all women. They all sing. They have great voices. And it's like an amalgam of early 2000s indie rock. They kind of have a Motorik vibe, like Neu! And German bands like that, where they have this constant propulsive rhythm that's driving everything forward all the time. It's really locked in and kind of repetitive, and then the songs kind of flourish on top of that. And if you like that kind of music, if you like that kind of German progressive rock from the early 70s, that kind of more experimental music, Neu! Can, Kraftwerk, things like that, but then you also have an interest in indie rock as well, this is definitely a band to check out. They were really overlooked. They are really fantastic, and this is my favorite album by them. They also have an album called Axes that's really, really good. I found out that they got back together and released another album. I haven't listened to that. I'm sure it's great. I'd like to check it out at some point, but Electrelane, No Shouts, No Calls, really, really good. Second album, also an E album, is from a band called Espers. It's Espers II. This is a American band, came out of sort of the freak folk, psychedelic folk scene of the early 2000s. And this band, I remember when I was younger getting into arguments with people who, because, you know, early 2000s, there's still that real like, oh, progressive rock is super uncool and we don't want to be associated with progressive rock, and we can't say we like anything that's prog because then we're just saying that we're huge nerds who, you know, wear capes and love dragons and things like that. And, you know, I'd argue with these people that this was a prog album. Like, it's got like 10-minute long songs with multiple movements and all kinds of different unusual instruments and time changes and things like that. Oh, well, no, it's not prog, but that was just because it was uncool to say it was. But I would say this is just a straight up folk prog album. Really, really good album. Really haunting, delicate, kind of creepy sounding music. It's a lot of acoustic folk kind of stuff. It reminds me a bit of some Renaissance songs, but with a lot more restrained, a lot more subtle, a lot more low-key. Beautiful harmonies. They've got a male singer, a female singer. The voices work wonderfully together. Really excellent production value. The guitars and the recording of instruments on this sounds great. And it really just creates this fantastical, haunting, unsettling, beautiful atmosphere. Definitely recommend this album a lot. It was one of my favorites back in the day as well. Espers II. The third one I'm going to talk about, very different in sound from those two albums. This is by a British noise duo. They started as a noise duo anyway. They're called Fuck Buttons. They did an album, this is their second album, called Tarot Sport. Their first album is called Street Horsing, and it's just a straight noise album. It's really cool if you're interested in that kind of thing. It's worth listening to, but I wouldn't recommend that album to a broad audience. It's quite challenging. This was their follow-up, and it brings in a lot of elements of electronic music and of post-rock music in particular. Has these long songs. It pulls from that kind of electronic vein where you get these repeated themes that are building on themselves, and then post-rock as well. You get repeated themes that are just building on themselves. The soundscapes that they build on this are just incredible, and then all of a sudden the song breaks through with this huge melody that sits on top. That's just gorgeous. Really powerful, really propulsive, really energetic. It's an album you can just like close your eyes, put on headphones, and you just feel like you're blasting off into space. It's a wild sonic experience. It sounds incredible. Not a lot of like technically complicated things going on here. It's all electronic music. It's all synthesizers. But don't let that scare you off, because it has a vibe to it that's a lot more like a post-rock band, like a post-rock album, with like you building up all those layers of distortion and those noise, and then you're bringing in these big melodies on top that give you this kind of emotional catharsis, and it's fantastic. And long songs, big songs that really build, that go places. So I think if you're a prog person, especially if you're one of those people like me who's really into post-rock as well as progressive rock music, this is definitely an album worth checking out. So the band is Fuck Buttons, and it's called Tarot Sport. They broke up a long time ago. One of the members went off to do another project called Blank Mass. Some of the Blank Mass albums have kind of a similar vibe. Really interesting project, worth listening to as well, but more in the electronic vein rather than the sort of post-rock sound that this one has. Third album I'm going to talk about, I'm going to break the rule I mentioned at the beginning a little bit, because this is a better-known artist, and one who often does get mentioned when you're talking about sort of indie crossover with prog. But she's one of my favorite artists of all time, and this is one of my favorite albums of all time, so I couldn't overlook it in good conscience, and that's Strange Mercy by St. Vincent. So St. Vincent's Annie Clark. She's an American guitarist and singer. She kind of bummed around the indie world for a little while, being backup singer for other people and guitarist for people, and then she did her first album called Marry Me in 2007, which is wonderful. Her second album was Actor in 2009. It is also wonderful. And this was her third album. It came out in 2011. And it is kind of sounds like if Adrian Belew played guitar for Kate Bush. She gets compared to Kate Bush a lot, and I understand that. She gets compared to Peter Gabriel a lot as well. She did an album with David Byrne. She sometimes gets compared to David Byrne. And I think those comparisons are warranted. She's clearly drawing a lot from that 80s art rock world. People like Kate Bush and David Byrne and Peter Gabriel. I don't hear the Adrian Belew comparison as much, but you definitely hear it in her guitar playing. She's a phenomenal guitar player, and she's very good at making her guitar do unconventional things and make kind of unconventional sounds in a way that is very reminiscent of Adrian Belew. I think she was definitely listening to the Fripp and Belew King Crimson albums from the 80s when she was sort of coming of age and learning guitar. It comes through in her guitar playing, but just really excellent melodies, really interesting arrangements. She does lots of arrangements of orchestral instruments that sort of pop up, gives the album a very interesting sonic texture. Definitely true of the previous two albums as well. You get clarinets sort of coming up here and there, and flutes and violin and things like that will just kind of pop up and go away, and then you're back to more of a conventional rock band sound. She moved away from that later on, especially like her next album was the self-titled St. Vincent. She moved to a bit more electronic sound, and then definitely with Mass Seduction, much more electronic influence. Like still a rock band sound, but more synthesizers, more loops, and programmed beats and things like that. And then with Daddy's Home, she did kind of a throwback 70s concept album. Probably my least favorite album of hers. But this album is phenomenal. One of the best albums of the 21st century, in my opinion. Just great. Chloe in the Afternoon, the first song, really good. Cruel, very evocative. The song Strange Mercy has this chorus like, if I ever meet that dirty policeman who roughed you up, and it just like gets stuck in my head, and whenever I listen to this album I'm singing that song for like 2 months after. So yeah, Strange Mercy by St. Vincent, phenomenal record, especially for fans of like 80s art rock music. If you don't know this album, you are missing out. I'm going to go with another better known artist, but not an artist that gets talked about in this context very often, and that's Sonic Youth. Sonic Youth, you know, one of the sort of quintessential 80s, early 90s alternative rock bands, and, you know, broke through in fairly big way around the time of grunge, though they were not a grunge band, more of an experimental alternative rock band. Did lots of interesting things in the 80s and 90s. In the early 2000s, they did a run of albums when Jim O'Rourke joined the band, who's a great musician, great guitarist in his own right, great composer. And I think the sort of run of albums they did from maybe New York City Ghosts and Flowers in 2000 through to Rather Ripped, or maybe The Eternal in 2009, which was their last album. They really step it up sonically. A lot of the early Sonic Youth albums, ironically, don't sonically sound that good. They're pretty lo-fi recordings. They were doing a lot of experimenting on the side with their SYR series, soundscapes. They were playing new music. They're playing pieces by Steve Reich and John Cage and things like that on these SYR recordings. Clearly, pulling in a lot of different unusual influences. And I think the guitar playing on that run of albums reminds me quite a bit, again, of Fripp and Ballou. The way these sort of interesting arpeggios that don't seem to quite fit together are put together, and they give the songs this kind of off-kilter vibe. Really interesting stuff. And, if you like that kind of music, or the other ones I think of are the albums that Fripp did with Andy Summers from The Police, Bewitched and I Advance Masked, that have that kind of the two guitars going in cycles that don't quite line up, and it throws everything off. If you like that kind of music, the early 2000s output by Sonic Youth, and my personal favorite album is Sonic Nurse from that period. Really, really good album. But all of them, Murray Street, New York City Ghosts and Flowers is probably the weirdest and least accessible, and I think Rather Ripped is probably the most straightforward and accessible. But Murray Street and Sonic Nurse hit a really nice balance between the kind of weird, off-putting stuff and the more accessible, conventional alternative rock songwriting. And I think if you're into kind of interesting guitar music, and guitar music where the guitars are being played in unusual ways and the music is fitting together in kind of an off-kilter way, in a way that's reminiscent of the different projects Robert Fripp has done with other guitarists, check these albums out. I think they're overlooked by prog fans, and they're really, really good. And the last one I'm going to talk about, local boys from Victoria, though they got big when they were in Montreal, and that's Wolf Parade. So one of the big Canadian indie rock bands from the early 2000s. This is their second album, called At Mount Zoomer. Really quintessential indie rock sound, stripped down. You got the multiple vocalists, Spencer Krug and Dan Beckner, singing these songs. Really, a lot of it is sort of the more straightforward indie rock, and you might go, well, why are you calling this a prog album? You get to the end, there's a phenomenal song called Kissing the Beehive, which I think is a Spencer Krug song, and it's a full-on prog song, and it's awesome. A lot of people say the first album, Apologies to the Queen Mary, is better, but I've always loved this album, At Mount Zoomer. Fantastic album. If you want to if you don't really listen to indie rock and like, well, what's the deal with indie rock? What does like early 2000s indie rock sound like? This is the sound of early 2000s indie rock until you get to that last song, and then it's just prog. So great album, great band. They're playing here in a couple months, and I don't think I'm going to get to see them, which is really unfortunate. But yeah, they're lots of fun. I don't have a whole lot to say about this one again because it's just sort of it's just a straightforward indie rock album. Really good songs, really well written songs, interesting vocals, interesting stuff going on. The interplay between Spencer's keyboards and Dan Beckner's guitars, really fun. And then it just ends with a full-on prog song, and it's great. So Wolf Parade at Mount Zoomer, check it out. So that's it. That's 5 indie rock albums for prog rockers. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please check out some of the other videos on the channel. In particular, please check out Versus Music, and subscribe if you like this stuff. We really appreciate it. So thanks very much. I'll talk to you on the next one.